The Greg Larsen Show. The big unit is ready to go. The Greg Larsen Show. The big unit is ready to go. Muck around on diazepam, a big custard in his hand. The greatest podcast in all the land. The Greg Larsen Show. The Greg Larsen Show is brought to you by Colgate Cigarettes. Smoke Colgate cigarettes. It's good for your health. Well, welcome back to the Greg Larsen Show, everybody. I am your host, Greg Larsen. The year is 1945, and we are back with another episode of this podcast. Now, the big news of the day is that German Chancellor Adolf Hitler has passed away at the age of 56. He passed last night with his wife Eva Braun in his bunker in Berlin. Tributes have been flowing in from international leaders for this controversial figure. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese spoke earlier, saying that whilst he disagreed with his policies, and that Australia obviously is currently at a state of war with Germany, he was still saddened to hear of the leader's suicide. Whilst using tactful language and being careful not to openly praise Mr. Hitler, Albanese did commend the late Chancellor's oratory abilities and his strength at uniting the German nation, whilst also condemning those in the media making light of Mr. Hitler's suicide. And I certainly here at the Greg Larsen Show wish to echo those sentiments. Whilst we can disagree with Hitler all we like, I've been seeing posts up in the town square notice boards of people making light of his death and even celebrating it, which I think is just despicable. Always remember, at the end of this, Adolf Hitler was a human being, with a wife and a dog. He loved his dog very dearly, and suicide is never funny. It's never okay to make jokes, to make light of mental health issues. This is a man who is clearly struggling with internal demons, and maybe if we had all shown a little more sympathy and a little more empathy for a man with these mental health issues, and tried to understand a little of where he was coming from, perhaps we would never have gotten into this whole global war mess in the first place. Similarly, at the same time as Mr. Hitler passed away, Dr. Goebbels and his wife also took their own lives. A senior member of the Nazi Party, who again, many of us had politics that we strongly disagree with. And on this show and on this program, I've always stated that I am firmly and staunchly opposed to Nazi policies. I do not agree with the Nazis, and I am against them politically. But to see the glee with which some are posting, again on these message boards in the town square, it disturbs me. Goebbels was a family man. Disagree with him all you like, but he was a family man with a wife and children. Do we celebrate the death of a man just because we disagree with him? And yes, I disagree with everything he did. I even disagree with the fact that his wife killed those children with cyanide capsules before the Goebbels couple killed themselves. But just because I disagree with someone doesn't mean I would ever make light of their death. A death by suicide, no less. Suicide simply isn't funny, and that is a stance I will always stand by. So whilst we were on opposite ends of the political spectrum, my condolences go out to both the families of Dr. Goebbels and Mr. Hitler. We disagreed on every policy, but please, when we talk about this, let's have a bit of humanity and a little bit of decency. And if this has raised any issues for you, please contact Lifeline on 131114. That number again is 131114. And turning now to the war. It seems like things are wrapping up in Germany for now, with fighting slowing down, and the German defeat seems inevitable. Now, this is good news for everyone here, that the war will finally be over, and soon some of our troops from over there will be returning home. And whilst that might be happy news for some, it raises a lot of tricky questions. These troops who fought for Australia, whilst we realise the unfortunate reality and the necessity of their actions, must still in some way be condemned. Yes, they were trying to defend Australia, these troops, but their use of violence to solve a political issue is simply not okay. And if we go around celebrating and praising their actions, it can become a slippery slope to condoning all kinds of political violence. Now, obviously, it's an extremely complicated issue, because on the one hand, they were conscripted to go over there, and they were ordered to go there by the Australian government, so legal action against our returning troops, against our boys, seems unlikely. It's unlikely they will face any sort of legal recompense. But what sort of message does it send when we allow those who do commit acts of violence, whatever the reason, to go unpunished? Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been very careful in his language, making sure neither to condemn nor condone the Australian troops. Personally, I think the result of this will likely be some sort of symbolic punishment, perhaps a fine or some form of community service, not a criminal charge, but a misdemeanor charge of some kind, something that acknowledges that what they did was vital to the defense of democracy and of our very nation, but also acknowledges that violence, even in those circumstances, is never okay. And that brings us then to the even more complicated and difficult issue of Nazi Germany. That is, what will happen now to the nation of Nazi Germany now that it is clear that they have all but lost the war? It's a complicated question. On the one hand, there are some in the media who claim that Nazi Germany were the aggressors of this war. Now, a claim that must be stated, German leaders do reject. Certainly the government in Berlin, the Nazi government, has argued and maintains to this day that they were acting in self-defense, and that the anti-German Treaty of Versailles and the attacks on the Reichstag and other, quote, undesirable influences from within the German state all constituted a form of genocide, according to Nazi leadership. Nazi leadership has said that there has been a global rise in anti-Germanic sentiment, and that an anti-Germanic attempts to wipe out the German people are a form of genocide. The German leaders have always maintained that their enemies wanted to commit genocide against all Germans and white Europeans, and that the actions of the Nazi German state were both defensive and proportionate to that threat. Now, that is the claim that Nazi Germany makes. I don't necessarily agree with that assertion, but it's important to point out their perspective and acknowledge both sides of this argument. It's a complicated issue. On the one hand, Nazi Germany has a right to exist and a right to defend itself. On the other hand, their actions perhaps went too far, especially towards the end of this conflict. And I would argue, as our Prime Minister had, that whilst we support the right of Nazi Germany to exist and wish to maintain post-war ties with Nazi Germany, there must be some accountability for the breaches of international law that have clearly occurred, perhaps in the form of some kind of trade sanction going forward. But there are extremist radicals on the left that want to see an end to Nazi Germany itself. They want, these radicals, these leftist extremists want to completely eliminate Nazi Germany from the map and replace it with a country that isn't Nazi Germany. This is not only an absurd plan, but it's downright offensive. They are saying things in protest marches like, Europe will be free. Saying that Europe will be free is a form of anti-Germanic hate speech, because it implies the elimination of all ethnic Germans. That's the unspoken language in this hate-filled rhetoric. Europe will be free. From the Germans is the subtext there, and from the Germans means the Germans will all be killed. We can talk about the geopolitical legal issues and what a new Nazi Germany would look like, but to call for the destruction of the entire Nazi state is deplorable and despicable. You can disagree with the government all you want, but to call for their entire destruction? This is an extremist position that we just simply cannot tolerate. I heard at a protest march the other day someone chant, and this was the actual chant they used in this protest, a word of warning. They said, "Death, death to Hitler's SS." Can you imagine such a thing being said out loud on our streets today in 1945? The SS are soldiers. They are regular German people with wives and families. To chant for their death is nothing short of absolute despicable hate speech. We need to turn the temperature down and have a realistic discussion without all the hate. We need to talk about moving forward and working with Nazi Germany to make sure that they can continue to have a pure ethnically German state, a state that is just for the Germans, as is their right, but to do so without breaching international law. It can be done. To call for the end of the Nazi state, or the end of the Nazi party, is not only unrealistic and unproductive, it's hate speech, plain and simple. Nazi Germany has a right to exist. We'll be right back after these commercials. Come on down to Jimmy Ricketts Cum Emporium, where you can get good quality cum at low, low prices. 2 gallons of pig cum will only cost a threepence, and dog cum a halfpenny. Human cum at Jimmy Ricketts is of the finest quality. Perhaps you're looking to use it to impregnate a human woman, cat, or other animal to create a hybrid man-beast. But you can also use it to bake a delicious cum pie, or just pour over your head and cover yourself in human cum. We also have piss for sale at prices that can't be beat. Old piss, clean piss, dirty piss, or even boiled piss. Here at Jimmy Ricketts Cum Emporium, we have you covered. In cum and piss. Jimmy Ricketts Cum Emporium, a cum shop like no other. Thank you there to our sponsor, Jimmy Ricketts Cum Emporium. If you're looking for good quality cum, I buy my cum from Jimmy Ricketts, and I think you should too. Now, we turn our news to the Eastern Front, where reports are emerging from the Soviet Union that in the occupied East, a series of so-called detention centers have been discovered. Now, Soviet troops have stumbled across these locations in places like Lublin and Auschwitz, and from the photographs and film released by the Soviet Ministry of Propaganda, conditions of the prisoners at these detention centers have been described as poor, and yet it is unclear what crimes they have committed, the prisoners in question. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese spoke of the sadness he felt when looking at the images coming from these centres, but stopped short of condemning Nazi leadership, whilst making sure to reiterate his condemnation of the Reichstag fire that began the war. Anthony Albanese explained that he has been assured that the centres were run in accordance with international law by the Nazi leaders. Now, the Nazi government has promised to conduct a thorough internal review of the detention centre procedures, but has again stressed that all footage and all images of these centres have come directly from Soviet leadership, which both the Nazi government and the Australian government has condemned. "We must remember that the Soviets are terrorists," said Anthony Albanese in a statement, and stressed again that any information given by the Soviets is unreliable at best. Now, I think in this information age, with radio and the advent of pamphlets and the ever-worrying threat of these new talking pictures, we need to be wary of what we trust and do not trust. Looking at the images of the prisoners in these detention centres is somewhat distressing, but we should not jump to conclusions. The Nazis have promised to conduct a thorough internal review, and we must trust that process, and understand that until the review has taken place, we are not in a position where we can form any kind of clear opinion as to what has happened. Certainly the images are distressing, but let's wait for that review to finalise once this conflict has come to an end. Now, news has also emerged of other facilities at Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, and several other locations, that large-scale extermination centres had been constructed by the Nazi leadership, not camps or prisons, but simply extermination facilities with the express purpose of killing the European Jewish population en masse. These are incredibly serious, but as yet unsubstantiated allegations that again come from Soviet sources, terrorist sources, which the Nazi government insists again is a terrorist organization, and the Nazi leadership categorically denies any such allegations. Interim Chancellor Karl Dönitz has stated that these were in fact not extermination centres, but rather aid stations, in which Germany was providing food and aid to those in need during this conflict. And whilst regrettably some insurgent activity may have occurred during the delivery of this aid, the fact is we have no reliable information other than Soviet propaganda. So it's hard to say what the conditions on the ground are like. But President Trump, Keir Starmer, and Anthony Albanese and other world leaders have all joined in saying they will hold off judgment until the internal Nazi investigation comes to a close. Now, my 2 cents are this. We can't be too hasty. We can't be rushing to judgment. It's very easy to become emotional when we're confronted with these talking pictures and radio broadcasts and information that we're seeing in this rapidly expanding information age. But war is a tricky thing. And whilst the Nazi government assures us that, and assures the international community that is doing everything it can to minimize civilian casualties, we must always remember the Reichstag fire and the anti-Germanic Treaty of Versailles that began this conflict. Now, surely, if the Nazi government says they were aid stations, and they have indeed sent us countless photos of aid being delivered, boxes of food and such forth, then we must have some faith that they were at least trying to do the right thing. Obviously, mistakes can happen in war, and promises can be not lived up to. And if it turns out that there were, in fact, deaths in places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and others, then we need to first look at how many of those deaths were anti-Nazi, anti-German terrorists, because it is, again, a complicated issue. And then we need to see what the internal review by the Nazi Party says. Calling for the abolition of the Nazi state and celebrating the death of Mr. Hitler does absolutely nothing to help the situation. It simply inflames tensions. And speaking of inflaming tensions, Greta Thunberg and her band of anti-war activists are on their way to the Eastern Front as we speak in the so-called Freedom Convoy, with the aim of delivering aid to Jewish populations of Eastern Europe. This convoy has been condemned by every major world leader as at best a misguided gesture of youth and at worst a cynical publicity stunt. Now, as I have always said on this program, you won't find anyone who disagrees with the Nazis more than me. I have been outspoken in my criticisms of Mr. Hitler, Mr. Goering, Mr. Himmler, and company. And whilst of course I grieve the many deaths of high-ranking Nazis, as any human being should, I must remind you, one should always mourn the loss of a human life, no matter who it is. I do think, and I have always maintained, that there must be accountability for the bad apples within the Nazi organization, who took things too far. And there were people within the Nazi Party who took things too far. We should all be open and honest about that and admit that reality. Fines and sanctions should be leveled at some individuals within the Nazi Party, and perhaps in due course, perhaps even some Nazis should face some form of prison time. I agree. I've always said that. I've always agreed with that sentiment. But this freedom convoy of activists like Greta Thunberg and these Hollywood celebrities wearing pins, it's just a way for these media darlings to promote their talking pictures or their pamphlets or radio plays or what have you. Greta is simply making a nuisance of herself. And these young college students, university students, who you see on campuses here in Australia, all around the world, who support her, who go to these protest marches, who are waving flags, they are simply showing how much of a limited and simplistic understanding they have of how the real world works. War is a difficult beast. War is complicated by its very nature. It's easy to wave a flag and chant a slogan, but Greta Thunberg is helping no one with this publicity stunt. And to see people here at home in Australia, seeing them waving flags, protesting about things that are happening a world away, it makes me ask, why are we trying to bring those problems here? You know, you can criticize policies all you want, but why are we importing these problems? We can't possibly solve this problem in Europe from a university campus in Melbourne. Do you think this problem is going to be solved by blocking the road and preventing people from getting to work? Do you think that's going to do anything to help the European Jewish population? I mean, this is a complicated issue, and that's the long and the short of it. We have become so polarized, so black and white, so us versus them, that we have forgotten the nuance of the political world. We have forgotten to use our brains and think that not one side is right and one side is wrong, but the truth is often somewhere in the middle, muddled up and mixed up there in that middle ground. And that's where I like to dig and find the answers. I believe that we could sit here all day long and argue about who did what to whom, who started the conflict, how it all began. One can go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years and talk about all the different things that occurred, and it seems irrelevant. It just seems like a waste of time. At the end of the day, the best way to move forward is to forgive, to forget, and to get back to business. These areas of Poland and Ukraine and Eastern Russia that, because of this conflict, have been rendered largely uninhabitable now. But, perhaps it's time that President Trump, as President Trump said, to use this land and build a fine resort there. The people there have already been displaced. They can go somewhere else. Let's build something there. Promote tourism. Get people spending money. The best way to peace is a healthy economy in which consumers feel empowered to spend. So let's make it happen. Let's make spending happen. Let's get the economy flowing. We don't need any more war. We don't need any more conflict. We need a peaceful solution that allows Nazi Germany to exist and to profit and to trade with her allies. And we all need to remember not to put too much stock in Soviet propaganda. And we can't fall into the trap of hysterically talking about things like extermination camps and genocide. Using that kind of language just doesn't help anyone. Let's get back to business on both sides. There's fault and blame on all sides. Let's have the Nazis tone down their rhetoric. And let's have the left tone down their rhetoric. People on both sides need to stop celebrating deaths, whatever the case may be, whether it's at some kind of detention center or whether it's a high-ranking Nazi official ending their own life in tragic circumstances. Tone down the rhetoric. Simmer down. Step away from the extremes and let's get back to business. And those are my 2 cents. So thanks to Colgate cigarettes, a smooth cigarette that clears out your lungs, and thanks again to Jimmy Ricketts Cum Emporium, the sponsors of this program. We'll see you next time on The Greg Larsen Show.
The Greg Larsen Show! The big unit is ready to go! The Greg Larsen Show! Muck around on the Mazapan, a fresh custard in his hand, the greatest podcast in all the land. Greg Larsen Show.